The bridge of the United Earth starship Steadfast was quiet. It was always quiet before a jump. Captain Lee Min-soo sat in his command chair, his eyes fixed on the main viewer, which showed the swirling blue tunnel of faster-than-light travel. His hands rested on the armrests, perfectly still. Around him, his crew worked with a calm, practiced efficiency. There were no shouted orders, no frantic activity. Just the soft hum of the ship and the occasional tap of a control panel. Commander Park Ji-young, his second-in-command, stood at the tactical station. Her posture was straight, her focus absolute as she reviewed the final intelligence packet for the 100th time. The data was grim. On her screen, grainy images showed the enemy. They called themselves the K-Thor. Their ships were not built. They were grown, ugly, twisted things that looked like cancerous rocks or burnt bones. They moved in swarms, and they consumed everything. Planets, stations, starships, even the energy from weapons fire. They ate it all, using it to make more of themselves. The Galactic Union, a collective of a dozen advanced species, had thrown everything at them. Their most powerful plasma cannons, their gravity-shear missiles, their particle disintegrators. Nothing worked. The K-Thor just absorbed the energy and kept coming. A soft chime echoed on the bridge. Navigator Kim Hyan turned in his seat. "Captain, we are approaching the exit coordinates for the Viridia system. Transition to real space in 30 seconds. "Thank you, Hyan," Min-soo said, his voice low and even. "All stations, final check. Report. Engineering is green. Causal stabilization drive is primed and ready," came the voice of Specialist Kang Tai-yang from the engineering station. The young man's fingers danced over his console, checking levels only he fully understood. "Tactical is green. All perimeter fields are stable," Ji-young reported. She did not look up from her screen. "The Union's last confirmed defensive line is around the 6th planet. Their signals are fading. Life support and internal systems nominal," said Engineer Choi Suman from the secondary station. Her job was to keep the crew alive. No matter what happened outside the hull, Min-soo gave a single, slow nod. The distress call had reached Earth 3 days ago. It was not a call for help to humanity, specifically. It was a general broadcast, a final scream into the dark from the Galactic Union. They were asking for any available ships, any supplies, any volunteers for a last stand. Humanity was new to the galaxy. Our starships were few. Our technology was considered simple and blunt. The Union saw us as children, well-meaning but weak. They expected us to send a hospital ship, maybe a few cargo vessels with food. They did not expect a battle fleet, but Earth's leaders had listened to the description of the K-Thor. Our scientists had analyzed the Union's sensor data, and a cold, unanimous decision had been made. The Steadfast and her sister ships were not just warships. They were something else entirely. They were sent not to join a fight, but to end one. Exit in 5, 4, 3, 2. 1. Hyan counted down. The blue tunnel on the viewer collapsed into a pinpoint of light and then exploded into a view of open space. The Viridia system was beautiful. A yellow star burned in the distance. But the beauty was broken. The space between the Steadfast and the star was littered with debris. Shattered hulls of Union ships, glittering in the starlight like broken glass. Clouds of gas and frozen coolant formed a grim nebula of death. And further in, a chaotic dance of light and destruction. The Union fleet, what was left of it, was a ragged crescent formation near a gas giant. Their ships were elegant, sleek, designed by different species, some looking like birds, others like fish, others like crystals. They were firing everything they had. Beams of scarlet and emerald light stabbed into a dark, swirling mass that blotted out the stars. The K-Thor swarm. It was even more horrible in person than in the reports. The ships pulsed with a sickly internal light. They moved not in formation, but like a cloud of gnats, a single, terrible organism. Where the Union's weapons hit, the K-Thor ships would glow brighter for a second, absorbing the energy, and then keep moving. They were slowly, inevitably, closing in. A communications alert flashed on Minsu's screen. The signal was weak, laced with static and a background noise that sounded like screams and tearing metal. He opened the channel. Unidentified vessels. Unidentified vessels entering the Viridia engagement zone. This is Admiral Kellis of the Galactic Union Defense Force. You must retreat immediately. This system is lost. The K-Thor cannot be stopped. Save yourselves. Do not throw your lives away. The Admiral's voice was raw with desperation and exhaustion. Minsu took a slow breath. He could see the tactical plot updating. The K-Thor swarm was shifting. A tendril of it was breaking off from the main body, turning towards the newly arrived human fleet. They had been noticed. They were new matter to consume. On the bridge of the Steadfast, no one panicked. Jiang watched the approaching tendril of enemy ships, her expression calm. Haiyan kept the ship steady. Taiyang's hands were poised over his console. Waiting, Minsu leaned forward slightly and pressed the button to respond. His voice was calm, clear, and carried a quiet authority that cut through the static of the channel. Admiral Kellis. This is Captain Lai Minsu of the United Earth vessel Steadfast. We have received your situation. Please order all Union forces to disengage and hold position. Move away from the K-Thor vector. There was a long pause, filled only with the sounds of distant battle. When Kellis's voice returned, it was confused, almost angry. Disengage? Captain Minsu, if we break formation, they will overrun us in minutes. What is your intent? Our intent is to resolve the situation, Admiral, Minsu replied, his eyes on the viewer as the first K-Thor scout ships, jagged and hungry, began to fill the screen. Please trust the instruction. Move your ships. This will be over shortly. He closed the channel without waiting for another argument. He looked at Jiang. She met his gaze and gave a slight, confident nod. He then turned his head towards the engineering station. Specialist Kong, prepare the field. Full system saturation. Taiyang's face was serious, lit by the soft glow of his controls. Aye, Captain. Causal stabilization field is ready. Awaiting final command. Minsu settled back into his chair. Outside, the leading edge of the K-Thor swarm was almost upon them. The Union fleet, hesitantly, began to pull back, their ships turning and burning their engines to escape the advancing darkness. The Admiral had chosen a desperate, tiny shred of hope. On the viewer, the first K-Thor ship, a nightmare of spikes and shadow, filled the screen. It opened, a mauve crackling black energy ready to taste the Steadfast. The crew of the human ship watched it come. No one flinched. No one raised their voice. Captain Minsu watched the enemy fill his view, and he spoke a single quiet word. Activate. Admiral Kellis of the Silrine stared at the tactical hologram, the fine feathers around his beak trembling with a mix of fury and despair. The new ships, the human ships, had just told him to retreat. To break the last, fragile defensive line that was all that stood between the K-Thor and the core worlds of 10 species. It was madness. Sheer, suicidal madness. His bridge was a scene of controlled chaos. Smoke hung in the air from a damaged console. The low, bone-deep hum of the K-Thor signal, a sound that felt like hunger, seeped through the bulkheads. His first officer, a stocky Tarkellan whose hide was slick with stress fluid, growled. They are fools, Admiral. Arrogant primitives. They have sealed their fate and shortened ours. Kellis did not reply. His large, black eyes were fixed on the sensor readout of the human vessel, the steadfast. It was a blocky, simple thing, gray and unadorned. It had no visible weapon ports, no glowing energy projectors. It looked like a cargo hauler, and it was just sitting there, motionless as a spear tip of the Kathor swarm detached and arrowed towards it. The humans were going to die in seconds, and their pointless arrival had only hastened the end. A part of him, the part that was still a commander, replayed the human captain's voice. It had not been the voice of a fanatic or a fool. It had been calm, certain. It held a tone Callus had not heard in a long time. Authority without desperation. Signal the fleet, Callus said, his voice raspy. Order all vessels to disengage. Fall back to the rally point near the gas giant's moon. Maximum thrust. The shock on his bridge was palpable. Admiral, his first officer protested. Do it. Callus shrieked, the strain breaking his composure. If they are fools, we gain a few minutes to breathe. If they are not, we must be clear. He did not voice the third, impossible thought, that they might actually be what they seemed. On the view screen, the beautiful, tragic ballet of the Union's last stand began to unravel. The bird-like Silrine cruisers, the crystalline Borland frigates, the heavy, planet-like Tarkellen bulwarks, all turned their elegant forms away from the enemy and pushed their engines to the limit. They were not fleeing in panic, but executing a desperate, ordered retreat. And behind them, the Kathor swarm sensed the shift. The dark mass pulsed, and the spear tip heading for the humans grew larger, joined by more tendrils. The main body began to ooze forward, eager to consume the retreating fleet. Callus watched the human ship. It did not move. It did not fire. The lead Kathor vessel, a jagged shape the size of a mountain, filled the space before it. He could see the moment the Kathor's primary weapon activated. A fissure of black light rippled across its surface, a mouth opening to the void, designed to unravel the bonds of matter and drink the energy released. This was it. The humans would be erased in a flash of stolen light. Callus closed his eyes for a second, a silent apology to a species he had never met. When he opened them, nothing had happened. The Kathor ship was still there. Its black maw was still open. But nothing was coming out. And the human ship was still there, utterly untouched. Sensor report. Callus barked. I am reading no energy discharge from the Kathor vessel. A sensor officer stammered. Its power signature is fluctuating wildly. On the screen, the Kathor ship began to change. The violent, sickly light, pulsing within its structure, started to stutter. It did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply faded. The jagged spikes of its hull became less distinct, as if someone was slowly erasing them from a drawing. The black maw flickered and winked out. Within 3 heartbeats, the entire massive vessel was gone. Not a cloud of debris, not a flash of light. Just empty space where a planet killer had been. A profound silence gripped the Union flagship's bridge. Then it happened to the next ship in the tendril. And the next. An invisible wave was passing through the Kathor formation. Where it touched, the nightmare ships ceased to be. The effect was not flashy. It was quiet. It was clean. It was the most terrifying thing Admiral Callus had ever witnessed. What are they doing? His first officer whispered, all anger gone, replaced by awe and dread. The human fleet, Callus now saw, was not idle. The Steadfast was the center, but the other human vessels, just as plain, just as unremarkable, had positioned themselves in a precise geometric array. A soft, pearlescent glow had begun to emanate from their hulls. Not a weapon's glare, but the gentle light of a data screen. The wave of unmaking was spreading faster now. It washed over the spear tip that had threatened them, erasing it completely. It did not slow. It moved outwards in a perfect, growing sphere from the human formation. It touched the edges of the main Cathor swarm, the monstrous cloud that had destroyed fleets and consumed worlds. And the cloud began to vanish. There was no struggle, no resistance. The Cathor ships, which had absorbed and ignored the Union's most potent weapons, had no defense against this. They did not fight it. They just stopped. One moment, a chaotic mass of existential hunger. The next, a void. On the Steadfast, the mood was one of focused work. Specialist Tai Yang monitored a cascade of data on his screen, his brow slightly furrowed in concentration. Field integrity at 100%. Propagation is nominal. No unexpected feedback. Captain Min Su watched the main viewer, which showed the expanding wavefront of nothingness wiping the enemy from the stars. His face showed no triumph, no satisfaction. It was the look of a surgeon watching a dangerous, infected tissue being cleanly excised. Commander Jiong tracked the Union fleet's retreat. Admiral Kellis complied. All Union assets are now outside the effective radius. No friendly entities will be affected. Navigator Hyen kept a steady hand on the controls, though the ship required no piloting. He simply watched the instruments that confirmed their place in space was held utterly, immovably firm. Engineer Suman monitored the crew's vital signs. All were normal. Steady heart rates, calm brainwaves. The only sound on the bridge was the soft hum of the ship and the occasional click of a console. In less than a minute, it was over. The space where the Cathor swarm had been was empty. Completely, utterly empty. The debris field from the earlier Union battles still floated, untouched. The stars shone through once more. The terrible humming hunger signal was gone, replaced by the natural silence of the void. The Union fleet had stopped their retreat. They hung motionless near the gas giant's moon, a collection of battered, beautiful ships. They were not firing. They were not moving. They were just staring. The tactical screen on Callis's bridge was clear. Every hostile icon had disappeared. The system, which had been a roaring inferno of death moments before, was now as quiet as a grave. A grave for a horror they could not comprehend. The communications panel chimed. It was the human channel. With a claw that shook slightly, Admiral Kellis opened it. The human captain's face appeared on the screen. He looked the same as before, calm, composed, perhaps a little weary. Admiral Kellis, Min Su said, the immediate threat has been neutralized. Please secure your wounded and stand by. We will need to perform a full spectrum scan to confirm no residual signatures remain. Kellis could only stare. The words neutralized and residual signatures echoed in his mind. They had just erased an apocalyptic fleet from reality. They spoke of it like gardeners pulling weeds. Captain Min Su, Kellis finally managed, his voice thin. What was that? On the screen, Min Su offered a small, polite, and utterly unreadable smile. That, Admiral, was the job. We will explain shortly. For now, you are safe. The silence on the bridge of the Union flagship was heavier than the vacuum outside. Admiral Kellis stared at the now clear tactical display. The spots where the Cathor swarms had been now just harmless, empty grids. He could hear the ragged breathing of his crew, the soft, disbelieving whispers. The human ship, the Steadfast, hung in the center of the view screen, looking as plain and unthreatening as a stone. Yet it had just performed an act of power that rewrote every understanding of warfare in the galaxy. On the Steadfast, the mood was different. It was not celebratory. It was procedural. The main event was over. Now came the verification. Initiating full-spectrum diagnostic sweep, Specialist Tai Yang announced, his voice steady. His fingers moved across his console, calling up complex waveforms and cascading strings of data. The screen showed a schematic of the local space, with the human fleet at the center. A lattice of invisible energy, like a fine net, began to expand from their ships, pulsing gently. It was the same field, but now tuned to a passive scanning mode. Captain Min-Su watched the process. Focus on the quantum signature decay trails. Look for any recursive patterns. Commander Jiong coordinated with the other human ships. All vessels sync scan parameters. Report any anomalies, no matter how minor. Engineer Sumin monitored the internal systems. The causal stabilization drive, the heart of their technology, was cooling down from its massive output. She watched temperature gauges and energy buffers, ensuring everything was returning to a safe, resting state. Drive core stabilizing. No stress fractures. All systems in the green. Navigator Hyen finally allowed himself a small, quiet breath. The jump was precise. The deployment was perfect. The result was clean. He looked at the starfield on the viewer, now peaceful again. He thought of the lives on the Union ships, the civilizations they represented. They were safe. That was the point. On the Union ship, Callus finally found his voice. He opened the channel to the Steadfast again. The human captain's face appeared, patiently waiting. Captain Min-Su, Callus began, struggling to keep his tone professional, to sound like an admiral and not a shocked child. The Galactic Union owes you and your people a debt we can never repay. You have saved billions of lives. But I must ask, I must understand, what was the nature of your weapon? Our sensors detected no directed energy, no projectile, no antimatter burst. We saw a wave, and then nothing. Min-Su listened, his expression neutral. He glanced to the side, where Jiang gave a slight nod. The scan was proceeding. They had a moment. It was not a weapon, Admiral, Min-Su said. The statement was so simple, so firm, it left no room for argument. Callus felt a chill. Not a weapon? Captain, it destroyed the Cathor utterly. It did not destroy them, Min-Su corrected, his words precise. It removed them. There is a fundamental difference. He paused, choosing his next words with care. He was speaking to a military commander, but he was explaining a principle of physics. The Cathor were not a normal enemy. They were not using ships. They were a self-propagating reality infection. On the Union Bridge, the science officers leaned forward, their own shock momentarily overridden by desperate curiosity. Their method of consumption, Min-Su continued, involved locally rewriting the laws of quantum stability. They created a small bubble of altered physics, where matter and energy were not bound by normal rules. This let them disassemble anything they touched and absorb its base properties. Your weapons failed because they fired energy and matter into that bubble. The bubble simply absorbed it, using your attack to fuel itself. Callus remembered the reports. The way their mighty plasma beams were simply swallowed by the darkness. The way missiles detonated silently, their fire sucked into the Cathor hulls. It made a terrible sense. What you witnessed, Min-Su said, was the application of a causal stabilization field. It does not attack. It does not add energy. It does the opposite. It enforces. It restores the default, stable laws of physics in a given area. It tells space-time to behave, to be normal. He could see the dawning, horrifying comprehension on Callus's feathered face. So, when your field touched them, their altered state bubbles collapsed, Min-Su finished. The Cathor structures could not exist under normal physics. The bonds that held them together were not real bonds. When reality reasserted itself, those bonds ceased to be. The Cathor didn't explode. They simply ceased to have ever been coherent structures. They were erased from existence because in a stable universe, they never could have existed in the first place. The explanation hung in the air, colder and more absolute than any description of a superweapon. The humans had not brought a bigger gun. They had brought a universal solvent for impossibilities. A safety protocol? Kellis whispered, remembering Minsu's earlier cryptic phrase. Exactly, Minsu said, nodding once. Think of it as a containment field or a firewall. The Kathor were a virus in the system of reality. We deleted the virus and restored the system to its proper settings. On the Steadfast, Tai Yang looked up from his console. Primary sweep complete, Captain. 0 Kathor residuals detected within a 1 million kilometer radius. No recursive decay loops. The infection is cleanly removed. Begin secondary sweep, extended range, Minsu ordered. He turned back to the viewer. Admiral, we are confirming the area is clear. There is no lingering threat. The Kathor are gone. Kellis was silent for a long moment. The implications were crashing over him like waves. This technology, this power, it rendered every military in the galaxy obsolete. A species that saw galaxy-ending monsters as a mere containment issue. This technology, Kellis finally said, his voice full of a new kind of awe, edged with fear. The Union. We must have it. To protect ourselves. You must share it. On the screen, Captain Minsu's polite, unreadable smile returned. It was not a cruel smile, but it was firm. It was the smile of a man holding an answer he knew he could not give. That, Admiral, is not possible, Minsu said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The causal stabilization principle is not a weapon to be shared. It is a responsibility we bear. Its misuse would be catastrophic. But, he added, his voice softening just a fraction, its protection extends to you. Consider the Kathor. They are gone. That is the gift. The channel closed. Admiral Kellis sat back in his command chair, the weight of the new galaxy settling on his shoulders. He had been saved. His people had been saved. But he had just met the janitors of the cosmos, and he understood now that they held the keys to everything, and they had no intention of letting them go. The secondary sweep took 30 minutes. On the bridge of the Steadfast, the crew worked with the quiet focus of technicians, completing a complex, delicate repair. The drama was over. The miracle, as the Union saw it, was already a log entry in their systems. For Captain Minsu and his crew, it was the final stage of a well-defined procedure. Specialist Taiyang's screens showed cascading waterfalls of data. He was not looking for ships. He was looking for echoes. Fractures in the quantum foam, tiny ripples that might indicate a fragment of Kathor code trying to reassert itself. He found none. The universe in the Viridia system was smooth, stable, and boring. Just as it should be. Secondary sweep confirms primary findings, Taiyang reported, finally leaning back in his chair. He allowed himself a small sip of water from a bulb by his station. Space-time integrity is at 100% baseline. No latent exotic particles. No recursive probability waves. The area is sterile. Acknowledged, Captain Minsu said. He turned to Commander Jiang. Prepare the final report for Earth Central. Use priority channel theta, full sensor logs, and causal integrity confirmation. Jiang nodded, her hands already moving. Compiling now. The log will show a complete and clean resolution. No collateral damage. She paused. The Union fleet is hailing us again. Multiple channels. It's not just Admiral Kellis now. The signals are coming from the flagships of the Borland Consensus, the Tarkellen Hegemony. It's the full Union War Council. Minsu let out a slow breath. This was the expected part, the diplomatic aftermath. It was often messier than the physics. Put them through on a consolidated channel. Audio only. A moment later, the bridge speakers came alive. It was a chorus of voices, translated by the ship's computer, but still thick with different accents and emotions. Awe, gratitude, and a sharp, undeniable undercurrent of fear. Unprecedented act of salvation, Captain Minsu. The Borland people are forever in your debt. The Tarkellan hegemony wishes to confer its highest military honor. We must understand the principles. For the safety of all civilizations, this knowledge cannot reside with one species. The voices overlapped, a clamor of shock and demand. Minsu waited for a few seconds, letting the initial wave pass. This is Captain Lee Minsu of the United Earth Vessel Steadfast. We receive your acknowledgments. Our primary mission is complete. The Cathor existential threat has been neutralized. We are preparing to depart the Viridia system. A single voice, older and more measured than Kellis's, cut through. Captain, this is Prelate Vryn of the Borland Consensus. We speak for the Unified Galactic Union Council. Your actions today have rewritten history. But with such power comes profound responsibility. You speak of this as a safety protocol. The Union formally, and with the utmost respect, requests that you share this protocol. We must integrate it into our collective defense. The galaxy is a dangerous place. We have seen other anomalies. Minsu caught Jiong's eye. She gave a slight, knowing shrug. They had heard this before, in different forms, from the few other species who had witnessed their work. Prelate Vryn, respected members of the council, Minsu began, his voice firm and clear. The request is understood. It is also denied. The causal stabilization technology is not a weapon system. It is not a shield generator. It is a foundational corrective tool. Its operation requires a philosophical and ethical framework that is built into the core of human civilization. It is not something that can be installed or taught. It is something that must be lived. There was a stunned silence on the channel. You are saying humanity is uniquely qualified to wield universe-altering power. This was a new voice, sharp and skeptical. A Tarkellan commander. We are saying, Minsu replied, choosing his words with the care of a man laying stones on a path, that we are uniquely burdened by its necessity. We did not seek this. We developed it because we had to. Our history taught us the cost of reality itself becoming unstable. The tool exists to prevent that specific kind of disaster, not to win wars, to cancel them before they begin, when they threaten the fabric of existence. He let that sit for a moment. The Cathor were not an enemy to be defeated. They were a mistake to be corrected. We corrected it. You are safe. That is the entirety of our offer and our role. And if we do not accept this? Prelate Vryn asked, his tone cool. If the Union decides such power cannot be held by one, and demands its stewardship, on the Steadfast, the crew didn't tense. They simply listened. Engineer Suman watched her board, where the causal stabilization drive idled, its potential a sleeping giant. Navigator Hyan's hand rested near the jump controls. Minsu's answer was quiet, final, and carried the absolute certainty of natural law. Then you would have made yourself into the same kind of mistake, Prelate. And we would have to correct that too. But you will not. You are intelligent. You have seen what we do to mistakes. You are not a mistake. You are the neighbors we just helped. Please, focus on that. Rebuild. Heal. The galaxy is once again a stable place for you to do so. The silence from the Union Channel, this time, was total. It was the silence of a paradigm shifting. They had come begging for soldiers and found exterminators. Now they were being told, politely and firmly, that they were not pests. It was the most backhanded reassurance imaginable, and it was utterly convincing. We understand, Captain, Prelate Vryn said finally, his voice stripped of all its previous authority, now just tired and old. The Galactic Union thanks you for your intervention. We will not trouble you further. Safe journeys, prelate? To all of you, Minsu said. He nodded to Jiang, who closed the channel. The bridge was quiet again. The only sound was the hum of the ship. Report is uploaded and sent, Jiang said. Drive is at standby, ready for jump, Taiyang confirmed. Minsu looked around at his crew, at their calm, competent faces. They had not come for glory. They had come to do a job. The job was done. Set a course for the Sol system, Navigator Haiyan, Minsu said. Take us home. Haiyan entered the coordinates. Course laid in, Captain. Jumping in 60 seconds. On the viewer, the scarred but peaceful space of Viridia glowed. The Union ships, small and bright in the distance, held their positions, watching. They were not following. They were just watching the strange, gray ships that had saved them, and then calmly refused to change the balance of power in the galaxy. Because for humanity, there was no balance. There was only stability, and everything else was noise. The jump back to Earth was uneventful. The blue tunnel of faster-than-light travel enveloped the Steadfast, a familiar and soothing sight for the crew. There was no celebration, no relief. There was only the quiet hum of the ship and the soft light of the bridge consoles. The mission was complete. The paperwork was filed. Now, they were going home. Captain Minsu spent the first hour of the journey in his small ready room, reviewing the final logs. He watched the sensor recordings of the K-Thor dissolution. It was the same every time. A clean, silent deletion. He made a note for the science teams back on Earth. Field efficiency rated at 100%. No observable recursion. Recommend classification. Resolved. He closed the file. There was no emotion in the action. It was a task checked off a list. On the bridge, Commander Jiang oversaw the post-operation checks. She spoke quietly with Specialist Taiyang about the drive's performance metrics. They discussed energy curves and field coherence as if reviewing the results of a routine engine test. The fact that the engine test had erased an alien armada from reality was not part of the conversation. It was the expected outcome. Engineer Suman made her rounds through the crew quarters. She checked in on everyone, offering a smile, a word. She asked about sleep cycles, appetite, stress levels. The crew reported feeling fine, normal, a little tired, perhaps. Suman logged it all. Her job was to ensure the human element of the ship functioned as smoothly as the machines. Today it had. Navigator Haiyan, his shift over, sat in the mess hall with a cup of tea. He looked out the viewport at the streaking stars of the jump corridor. He thought not of the terrifying enemy they had faced, but of the precise coordinates he had entered, the perfect translation into real space. He had placed them exactly where they needed to be. That was his contribution. It was enough. 2 days later, the Steadfast slipped out of FTL travel at the edge of the Sol system. The familiar yellow glow of the sun welcomed them. The ship moved inward, past the silent, rocky orbits of the outer planets, towards the blue-green jewel of Earth. There were no parades waiting, no flashing news drones. Their arrival was noted by traffic control with a simple, coded acknowledgement. Steadfast, acknowledged. Proceed to Anchorage Point Delta. Welcome home. The ship slid into a high orbit, docking silently with one of the many unremarkable space stations that ringed the planet. This station was not for civilians. It was a hangar, a workshop, a place for rest and resupply for ships like the Steadfast. Minsu and his crew disembarked. They were met by a man in a simple gray uniform, a senior coordinator named Park. No titles, no fanfare. Captain, Coordinator Park said, shaking Minsu's hand. The download was clean. The council has reviewed. Well done. Thank you, sir, Minsu replied. The crew performed perfectly. I never doubted it. They always do. Park glanced at the data pad in his hand. The K-Thor signature has been added to the threat library. All long-range sensor buoys are now calibrated to look for similar quantum decay patterns. Your work will help us catch the next one earlier. The next one. It was stated as a simple fact. There would always be a next one. A crack in reality, a bug in the universe's code. Humanity's job was to patch it. The crew went their separate ways for a standard debriefing period. They would see counselors who would not ask about fear or trauma, but about focus and clarity. They would speak with engineers about system performance. They would have medical checkups. In 72 hours, they would be eligible for a new assignment, or for planetary leave. Min-Soo and Jeong walked down one of the station's long, quiet corridors. It had a view of Earth, vast and beautiful below them. They were scared, Jeong said after a while, her voice soft. The Union, not just of the K-Thor. Of us. I know, Min-Soo said, watching the continents turn slowly beneath the clouds. Fear is the normal reaction. They see a tool that can unmake stars and think, weapon. They look at the carpenters who build their houses and only wonder how easily the hammer could break their skulls. They don't understand that the carpenter only thinks about the nail. Jiang smiled faintly. Do you think they'll leave us alone? For a while, Min-Soo said. They will argue and study their sensor data and hold councils. And they will realize they have nothing to study. They saw an effect, not a mechanism. They saw the shadow of the tool. The tool itself is beyond them. Eventually, they will accept the new shape of things. The galaxy has gardeners. We are weeding. They reached the door to the debriefing suite. Min-Soo paused, his hand on the latch. They wanted soldiers, he said, almost to himself. Jiang nodded. She understood. The galaxy was full of soldiers, of warriors, of empires clashing over resources and ideology. They played a game of territory and destruction. Humanity had looked at that game long ago, seen its ultimate messy pointlessness, and had stepped off the board entirely. They had turned their attention to the board itself, to the table it sat on, to the fundamental stability of the room. They didn't fight over the sandbox. They ensured the sandbox didn't suddenly become a pit of acid. Inside, the debriefing officer, a woman named Lee, waited. She gestured for them to sit. Captain, Commander, let's begin. Start from the moment you entered the Viridia system. Tell me what you saw, what you did, and what you thought. In your own words. Min-Soo leaned back. He began to speak, his voice steady and clear. He talked of coordinates, of field activation parameters, of enemy dissipation rates. He was a craftsman describing a day's work. Outside the viewport, Earth spun, peaceful and unaware. Its people went about their lives. They argued about politics, fell in love, created art, worried about the future. They did not know, and would never need to know, about the K-Thor. They were protected from things that would shatter their minds to comprehend. They were kept safe in a stable, sane universe. And in the quiet rooms of stations like this, the carpenters, the gardeners, the janitors of reality rested. They drank tea, filed reports, and waited. They waited for the next crack in the world to appear, so they could smooth it over before anyone else even noticed it was there. Theirs was not a story of battle cries and glory. It was a story of a silent click, a satisfied nod, and a job well done. The enemy was gone. The universe was tidy again. It was enough.